we must cry, and we all must cry together, that we want our freedom and we want it now.
Fighting for freedom for all.
We believe at rock bottom that the solution to our problems are moral.
And putting their own lives at risk while doing so.
You understood from the get-go that you could be killed at any given moment.
For decades, they led the charge, pushing for equality and striving to make our country a better place. Now, with the passing of 3 civil rights pioneers, it's time to pass the torch.
So don't get weary.
Yes.
Keep the faith.
Yes.
There's no more single important thing to do than to remove racism from American culture.
I'm grateful. I've lived to see so many things come to pass that I never dreamed I would live to see.
Tonight, we are celebrating Atlanta's freedom fighters, fathers of the movement.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I'm Jovita Moore.
And I'm Fred Blankenship. Jovita, what an important and special evening this is. It's a time to honor the lives and legacies of 3 of Atlanta's freedom fighters, Reverend C.T. Vivian and Joseph E. Lowery, and Congressman John Lewis. Reverend Vivian and Congressman Lewis passed away on Friday, and John Lewis's message was one of nonviolence.
He led a long life of fighting for civil and human rights, a life that included 34 years of defending the gains he helped secure for Black Americans.
Hate is too heavy a burden to bear.
A civil rights icon, an advocate, Georgia Representative John Lewis dedicated his life to protecting human rights and building a country for everyone.
The full story of America cannot and will not be told until we tell the story of the history and contribution that African Americans have made.
Lewis and his siblings grew up on this farm near Troy, Alabama. His father was a sharecropper, and as a boy, he quickly noticed that life was different for people who looked like him.
I saw how my father, my uncles, my grandparents, and others were being treated. I saw the signs that said white, colored, white men, white women, colored women. To go downtown to the little town of Troy on a Saturday afternoon to the theater, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents why, and they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble.
The radio introduced Lewis to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., words that ignited a fire inside of him. It inspired him to join the movement.
And I was deeply inspired by this man. He inspired me. It seemed like he was saying to me, John Lewis, you too can do something. You can make a contribution.
Lewis wrote a letter to Dr. King.
Wrote me back, sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket, and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters or brothers, any of my teachers that I sent this letter to Dr. King. And I saw Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk in a little office. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" I was so scared. I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. I'm John Robert Lewis. And he started calling me the boy from Troy. And during that time, we became like brothers.
Lewis devoted himself to the movement, joining the Freedom Riders, civil rights activists who worked to integrate bus terminals across the South. While a student at Fisk University, Lewis organized sit-in demonstrations to integrate the lunch counters in Nashville.
We live in a different America, a better America.
A better America because of the movement that was building, a movement that often ended with Lewis getting spat on, beaten, arrested, and jailed. Lewis would go on to lead the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Later, he helped plan the 1963 March on Washington, joining other leaders in meetings with the president, John F. Kennedy.
This was the first meeting to plan the march. Okay. This is the Big Six. Mm-hmm. This meeting took place on July 2nd, 1963, at the Commodore Hotel in New York.
A picture of that meeting was on display in his Atlanta office during my interview with the congressman in 2011. Lewis was the youngest speaker at that historic march.
It is true that we support the administration's civil rights bill. We support it with great reservation, however. Unless Title III is put in this bill, there's nothing to protect the young children and old women who must face police dogs and fire hoses in the South while they engage in peaceful demonstration.
He also joined Dr. King back down south in the fight to get federal protection for Black Americans who were denied the right to vote.
As you know, we are assembled here today to reaffirm our determination to gain the right to vote in Selma, in Dallas County, and all over the state of Alabama.
March 6, 1965.
I was in Atlanta discussing and debating with my colleagues in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Some people said we should march, others said we should not. I took the position that we had been in Selma since 1962. We have been arrested in 63 and 64. The people wanted to march, and we should march.
On Sunday, March 7th.
This march intends to keep off the highway. We will be marching on the shoulder of the road and will not in any way be interfering with the pursuit of traffic.
And the young came and said a prayer. We stood up, we got off our knees and lined up in twos and started walking in an orderly fashion with Jose Williams and myself leading the walk through the streets of Selma. We get to the edge of the bridge. Jose asked me, he said, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." I said, "What about you?" He said, "A little." And I said something like, "Well, there's too much water there. We're not going to jump. We're going forward." We continued to walk. We came to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers.
To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You are to disperse. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church.
You saw these men putting on their gas masks. The major said, "Troopers, advance."
Troopers here, advance.
They came toward us. Beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. I thought I was going to down that bridge. I thought I saw death. 15 years later, I don't recall how I made it back across the bridge, through the streets of Selma, back to the little church.
That brutal confrontation became known as Bloody Sunday. Scholars say the bloody images of that vicious attack helped hasten the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Lewis would go on to hold various leadership roles at several voting rights organizations. In the mid-70s, then President Jimmy Carter appointed him to lead Action, a federal volunteer agency. In 1981, he entered politics, winning a seat on the Atlanta City Council. 5 years later, in 1986, Lewis was elected to serve as a U.S. representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District, an office he held until his death. In 2015, 50 years after Bloody Sunday, Congressman John Lewis stood on a stage at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Many gathered to remember those who marched, to retrace the steps of those who gave so much, and to inspire a new generation.
But you and I are here. We can bear witness to the distance we have come and the progress we have made in 50 years, and we must use this moment to recommit our. There's still work left to be done.
On December 29, 2019, the man who withstood physical attacks and serious injury in the push for civil and human rights announced another big fight. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Lewis said then that doctors discovered the cancer during a routine visit.
Good morning. Good morning. It is good to be in Selma, Alabama one more time.
And not wanting to disappoint the people who were gathering for the 55th commemoration of Bloody Sunday, Lewis made a surprise appearance in March this year.
On this bridge, some of us gave a little blood to help redeem the soul of America.
In the middle of his own fight for survival, he still found strength to march one more time and inspire the crowd.
So don't get weary. Yes. Keep the faith.
Yes. Yes.
And months later, he was there watching as peaceful demonstrations got unruly in Atlanta after the death of George Floyd while in police custody in Minneapolis. Lewis sent this message to anyone thinking about joining the protests.
My message is very simple. If you're going to go out and protest, whether it be a sit-in, a stand-in, a march, a singing, do it in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion, and appeal to the better angels of your fellow human beings. Hate is too heavy a burden to bear, and we must lay it down and not hate anyone. The way of love is a better way.
The way of love is a better way.
Yeah,
the family of John Lewis spoke out today for the first time, and they said that he was a fighter with a tenacious spirit, and he fought Jovita to the very end.
He sure did. His younger brother, Grant, shared a moment that made him smile when he talked about how the congressman didn't get his driver's license until he was in his 40s.
I would drive him around to different places, and I remember he used to tell me, before we get out of the car, be patient, little brother. Every time. I never questioned him. The next time we'd go somewhere, he would tell me before we opened the doors, be patient, little brother. All of a sudden, it dawned on me. We would go into a building to get a loaf of bread or just something, light bulb or something, which should have took 10 minutes max. It would take us 3.5 hours because he would shake every hand, take pictures with everybody that wanted to take pictures. And that's the kind of person my brother was.
A great motto for life, be patient. And the congressman was always gracious and kind-hearted, even as he continued to fight for the rights of people. And Congressman Lewis and I met for an extended one-on-one interview in Selma, Alabama, and we walked the same path that he and others did 50 years earlier. He talked about what was going through his mind as they came face-to-face with officers who prepared to use brutal force to stop the march.
When I see the video of you at the foot of the bridge, you didn't move, you didn't flinch. What were you thinking at that moment when they were coming up to you, when they were screaming at you?
I thought we would be arrested and that we would be taken to jail. I didn't have any idea that we would be beaten, tear gas, and trampled by horses. I was prepared to go to jail. I was wearing a backpack, and in this backpack I had 2 books, 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to read and something to eat. I had toothpaste and a toothbrush. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth.
Just 2 days after that 1965 assault on Selma marchers who were demonstrating for voting rights, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and many religious leaders marched to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They prayed there, and that night, a white minister, Reverend James Reeb, was attacked by segregationists. He died from his injuries.
I wish for a moment that we would bow in a word of silent prayer for these brothers who came here to be with us today and who marched with us across the Alabama River, who marched to witness for freedom and to witness for their own personal dedication to the cause of justice.
The brutal violence in Selma was seen around the world. President Lyndon Johnson appeared on television to address the Congress and the nation.
What happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America. It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too, because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice.
Days after the president's speech and under the protection of Alabama's National Guard, Dr. King, John Lewis, and thousands of others marched 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. It took them several days to complete the journey. At the Alabama Capitol, Dr. King delivered his famous "How Long" speech.
I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment,
Yes, sir.
however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
Yes, sir.
Because no lie can live forever.
Yes, sir.
5 months later, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. The president gave Dr. King one of the pens he used to sign the bill.
What kind of historic moment was that for you?
When the Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, it was so meaningful. Many of us shouted for joy. And then when President Lyndon Johnson signed that act on August 6, 1965, we said it was worth it. The blood, the beating, the jailing, it was all worth it.
Under the Voting Rights Act, states that had a history of voter discrimination had to get federal approval in order to change their election laws. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that section of the act was unconstitutional.
When that decision came down, I wanted to cry because so many people had suffered. Too many people had died. And I wanted to say to some members of the courts that you never had to stand in unmovable lines. You never had to pass a literacy test, a We're going to fix it. We're going to bring members of Congress to Selma to walk across the bridge, to understand, to feel, to see what happened.
If you have been criticized for one thing, it is that you are too optimistic.
Well, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. You have to have this sense of hope, this sense of optimism. To lose hope, it's like you don't exist. You have to have hope and faith to continue to move and to believe that we can make it.
You have to have optimism and hope. Governor Brian Kemp ordered all flags to fly at half staff on all state buildings and grounds to honor John Lewis. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms ordered flags to be lowered on City of Atlanta facilities.
Congressman Lewis's death came just as Georgians were mourning the loss of another freedom fighter.
And Jovita, longtime civil rights leader Reverend C.T. Vivian died Friday morning. And as Channel 2's Dave Huddleston explains, just like John Lewis, Vivian began fighting for equal rights at an early age.
I found out that life is in the doing, right? And that's what the movement was about. It was doing things.
The only child of farming parents, Cordy Tyndall Vivian, or CT as we knew him, was born July 30th, 1924 in Boonville, Missouri. His family moved to Illinois in search of a better education for CT. It was in Peoria, Illinois, where he joined the fight for civil rights in 1947, a sit-in, a nonviolent demonstration to end segregation at lunch counters in the city.
Anytime you're present, you've got to do something about the conditions that you're in.
Nearly 10 years would pass before he would meet Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
What Martin King was after is that he wrote on the window of SCLC, to redeem the soul of America.
Vivian told us King's ability to inspire convinced him to join King's staff and take on a larger role in the civil rights movement. He organized sit-ins, took part in freedom rides, events that many times landed him and others in jail.
You understood from the get-go that you could be killed at any given moment.
He led a voting rights protest in Selma, Alabama. In what might be considered his defining moment, he confronted Sheriff Jim Clark on the courthouse steps.
I saw the club coming. There was a policeman on each side of him with the club held at each end. And he shot forward. It missed here and hit me right across there, right? And just tore loose all the skin under there. And the blood came down. The blood you see there had come down from underneath.
Vivian, like many others in the movement, said he had no fear of dying.
My wife and I had already come to the conclusion, right, that if I didn't come home from one of the actions, she knew and I knew that we were dependent upon God in the first place. Not to live, but to live decently and right and achieve something worth doing.
A life dedicated to making the world a better place for generations to come.
We did our job so well that they can hardly believe that the world that existed before existed at all.
A job so well done, the nation's first black president paid tribute.
And at 89 years old, Reverend Vivian is still out there, still in the action, pushing us closer to our founding ideals.
In November 2013, President Barack Obama honored Vivian and 15 others with the nation's highest civilian award, the Medal of Freedom.
It was so many years I fought for the freedom movement. So I like the fact that this is an honor of freedom.
An honor fitting for a man who never stopped doing.
You strike me as a man who's never going to stop fighting for what you believe.
Oh, it can't. I mean, I don't know how. Because there's no more single important thing to do than to remove racism from American culture. Not only for me and mine, or just for black people, but for this nation.
And just as Reverend Vivian's friends say that John Lewis was committed to a life of humility and action, and everyone from presidents and lawmakers to civic and religious leaders paid tribute to his legacy.
Channel 2's Richard Elliott talked with former Atlanta Mayor and Ambassador Andrew Young about his friend of 60 years and his determination to get justice.
He's been really a greater impact on this city and on this nation than any of us will ever know.
We talked with former Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young on the front stoop of his Southwest Atlanta home. Few people knew John Lewis better or longer than Mayor Young. They've been friends for nearly 60 years. Young credits John Lewis with getting him back to Atlanta and into the civil rights movement. Together, they worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on social justice causes throughout the country. Mayor Young says Lewis had a unique drive to seek justice wherever he could and had it ever since he first saw young John Lewis on the campus of Fisk University.
I was really impressed. This young man has been single-minded in his purpose to pursue the freedom and dignity that America owes to all of its citizens, for all of its citizens. And it's that single-mindedness with humility and courage that makes John Lewis one of the living saints of our time.
Others are remembering John Lewis too, and on both sides of the political aisle. His longtime friend, former Republican Senator Johnny Isakson, who famously hugged Lewis on the floor of the House, said this, quote, "I am terribly saddened by the loss of a great man. His legacy and the lessons he leaves behind have touched us all. I will miss you, my friend." Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms tweeted, "John Lewis loved unconditionally and called upon all of us to be better versions of ourselves." Governor Brian Kemp said, quote, "John Lewis changed our world in profound and immeasurable ways." Congressman David Scott tweeted, quote, "He took his fight for justice and equality for all, from the depths of Bloody Sunday to the halls of Congress." Mayor Young says his friend will best be remembered for his power and his humility.
But for me, he will be remembered for the power. You don't usually think of humility and power as going together, but on the floor of the Congress, when John got up, everybody listened because they knew he was speaking from his heart as well as his head, and they knew that he had a kind of uncorruptible integrity that you had to trust.
Mayor Young says he last saw John Lewis last week when it appeared his friend had taken a turn for the worst. But even then, he believed Lewis would endure.
I knew he was weak, but John is such a fighter that I knew that if he had decided that there was something left that nobody could do but him, he would fight to come back. And so I didn't want to believe that when I heard it.
Mayor Young says he got the call of John Lewis's passing from another former Atlanta mayor, Bill Campbell, who had remained close to John Lewis for years. Young says John Lewis always saw the best of what America could be, even if it had to be reminded of it.
Never wavered from his commitment to America and America fulfilling its destiny without violence.
In Atlanta, Richard Elliott, Channel 2 Action News.
And News Drone 2 captured this view of the Hero mural in downtown Atlanta. You can't miss it. The towering 5-story mural pays homage to John Lewis and his decades of service to the people of Georgia. And it is because of his fight. People across Metro Atlanta said they had to stop by the mural to pay their respects. And Channel 2's Audrey Washington talked with those who said there's no better time than the present to stand up for what's right.
The sound of church bells ringing echoed from Peachtree Street, down Edgewood, and finally to here on Auburn Avenue. This at the iconic Congressman John Lewis mural is where so many came to honor and remember the civil rights giant.
John Lewis is my hero.
Outside St. Luke's Church in downtown Atlanta is where I found Denise De La Rue. She stopped everything she was doing to come to the church, hear the bells, and remember John Lewis. He died Friday night at 80 years old after a long, brave battle with pancreatic cancer.
There's so little we can do at a time like this to be together and show tribute, and it seemed like such a lovely gesture, and it's just where I had to be.
Lewis died just a few hours after fellow activist C.T. Vivian passed away. The two, along with so many others, fought for equality, justice, and voter rights. 15-year-old Ashton Zienge says he's grateful.
How we can thrive in these communities and get out and become people like him, become civil rights leaders and activists and do better in our communities.
Ashton's mother says right now there is sorrow, but also peace. She believes John Lewis fought the good fight and ultimately won.
So it feels like a really big hole, but I do believe that he will still be an angel helping us from heaven.
And clearly this was a passing that touched so many people. I had the pleasure of meeting Congressman Lewis several times. He was very kind, such a gentle soul, but also intentional and a force. What he has done for people will never be forgotten. He will be missed. I'm Audrey Washington in downtown Atlanta.